It's happening! Spoiler warning for Let There Be Carnage. Let there be spoilers! As it stands, Venom clearly needs a little multiversal help in order to encounter our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And boy, will he! But there are plenty of non-friendly big city living Spider-Men to choose from. With the multiverse now reaching even across movie studios, Venom will be making his way to the main Marvel timeline. But who's to say he's the only one making the trip? While Tom Holland swings around dealing with his identity crisis, there are several darker, more evil versions of Spider-Man that Venom's time-space anomaly could have brought over as well. Let's check out which ones right now. We were first introduced to the Venom symbiote way back when Spider-Man was involved in Marvel's Secret Wars. His normal red and blue suit had been damaged, and he appeared with a new slick all-black look. It was not until later that we would learn that this self-healing suit was actually an alien symbiote from another world. It was at this moment that a lifelong rivalry was set up between two of the most popular Marvel characters of all time, Spider-Man and Venom. However, before their eventual separation and Venom's eventual bonding with Eddie Brock, the symbiote-infused Spider-Man was, well, I'm not gonna lie, he was kind of a jerk. The symbiote increased Peter's strength and fighting abilities, especially his healing, but it had a serious effect on Peter's personality. It heightened his aggression, and eventually revealed himself to Peter as a symbiote sharing his mind. We've seen this very scenario play out in film, as awful and cringy as it was. While Venom has been transported to the MCU, we could see an angsty Tobey Maguire mid-dance montage make his way to take over every nightclub in New York, bonded with his very own version of the Venom symbiote. Peter Parker is sometimes understated in how powerful he is. Thankfully for the universe, he often chooses to use that power for good in lieu of evil. However, what would happen if a villain was able to get inside his mind and use his power for nefarious purposes? This is exactly what happened when Adriana Soria got a hold of him. Known as the Queen, Adriana was a female soldier who was exposed to tests involving nuclear radiation and mutation. Due to this testing, she was granted the power to telepathically control people. Arriving in New York, she causes cab drivers to crash, police officers to fight each other, and normal citizens to worship the very ground she walks on. She even took control of Peter Parker and kissed him with an insect mutagen that not only made him bend to her will, but also transformed him into a literal spider monster. Peter eventually broke free of the spell, but just imagine the look on Tom Holland's face when a mutated spider version of himself comes strolling through a portal ready to destroy him at the request of a beautiful, mind-controlling woman. Only in comic books, folks. Who do we know that loves exposition, lives in a cathedral at the end of time, and who will most likely be a huge pain for the Avengers for years to come? No, not Paul Giamatti as the Rhino. Kang, of course. Kang the Conqueror is the next Avengers-level threat that will dominate a phase or two of the MCU, and there are many comic encounters with Kang that the MCU could draw from. Early on in the Avengers run, Kang used one of their own to try and bring about the end of the hero team. After observing Spider-Man for some time, Kang was incredibly impressed with the superhero's abilities. So what's the most natural next step that a villain would take? Create a time-traveling robot, of course. Kang the Conqueror created an android that was identical to Peter Parker in both powers and appearance, but with the ability to travel through time. Named the Time Spinner, this robot's sole purpose was to fight the Avengers, including the very hero from whom he was modeled after. The cause of the universe's crossing over is presently unknown, but one of the culprits certainly could be the Master of Time himself. If this is the case, a robot Peter Parker could already be traveling through time, waiting to give Spider-Man even more of an issue. One of the most well-known Spider-Man villains is Dr. Curt Connors, aka the Lizard. Dr. Connors is ultimately a good person, but as a scientist he invented a serum to help him regrow his arm. The resulting concoction was successful with little to no side effects. He just goes, slightly mad, gains superhuman strength, and also transforms into a giant lizard. The Lizard is another example of a Spider-Man villain driven to insanity based on a scientific formula. However, this ultimately means that this could have happened to anyone. It just so happened to be Dr. Curt Connors who took the serum. But what would happen if a hero had been given some variation of the Lizard serum? Well, that very question was answered when a supposed cure for Dr. Connors' scales and other issues had an adverse effect on Peter Parker. Peter slowly began to lose his mind, becoming more and more aggressive, even attacking innocent civilians. Eventually, he made the full transformation into the Spider Lizard, with the combined powers and madness of one of his arch-enemies. Had Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man failed to stop the Lizard in The Amazing Spider-Man, we could see the Spider Lizard come into reality and transport it along with Venom. In one comic storyline, Peter Parker as Spider-Man was beaten within an inch of his life by the scientific vampire Morlun. While in recovery, this experience awakened an animalistic side of Peter that even saw him defeat Morlun by pinning him down and biting him. As he went on, the animalistic side grew larger and larger, but Peter tried to contain it. Ultimately, he wound up hurting Mary Jane and others closest to him when he lost control on many different occasions. It seemed that this new version of Peter had lost his life in the final fight with Morlun, but really he had just entered a cocoon state. Eventually, engulfed in spiders, he emerged with a new power set and a whole new side of himself that was much more related to the spider aspect of his character. He ultimately decided to embrace this new side of himself, which he named the Other. This version of Spider-Man would cause a lot of problems in the MCU. As of right now, many members of the public are not too thrilled with Peter, and if this duplicate ran around biting villains' heads off, yeah, let's just say it wouldn't help his reputation. Mac Gargan is often the Spider-Man villain known as a Scorpion. However, that's not the only villain moniker that Gargan has possessed when opposing the great Peter Parker. For quite some time, Mac was actually the main host of the Venom symbiote. Together, Venom and Mac's hatred for Peter led the two to work together for various villainous activities. Mac met the symbiote when attempting to kidnap Aunt May, and it was less of a match made in heaven and more of a, well, there are worse options situation. At the same time, Spider-Man's nemesis, the Green Goblin, decided to form his own team of Dark Avengers, though the name was already taken, so he called it the Sinister 12. Mac Gargan as Venom was then recruited to be the Dark Spider-Man of the team, a much more violent and frankly hungry version of the Wallcrawler. Mac Gargan already exists in the MCU, and now that Venom may be joining him, he could just get a turn at wearing the black suit. Over the years, the Carnage symbiote has had multitude of hosts, ranging from the original Cletus Cassidy all the way to a great white shark. Somewhere in the middle of that, you can find your favorite web-slinging hero, Spider-Man. In Spider-Man the Animated Series, we saw an extremely powerful and dangerous version of Peter Parker. He had lost both his aunt and uncle, and handled it way worse than most other versions of Peter. He became a psychotic murderer and willingly bonded with the Carnage symbiote. Spider-Carnage has teamed up with the Hobgoblin and the Green Goblin of his universe to create a dystopian version of New York City. He then tried to expand his influence to other universes, where the normal Spider-Man had to assemble a team of variants to take him down. This could definitely happen in live action. A crazed Carnage-fueled Peter would be a terrifying sight to see walk through one of those portals that are being created by Doctor Strange, or the Watcher, or Loki, or Wanda. One of my favorite things about Marvel Comics are the mantles. These are positions that can be held by any character, but carry some sense of gravitas and prestige with them. Examples include Heralds of Galactus, Phoenix Force 5, and of course the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. This group of four has included such people as Magneto, Wolverine, Storm, Archangel, and even Spider-Man. In one alternate universe, Cable and Deadpool were just the best of friends, but Cable had gone missing. Searching for him, Deadpool comes across a world where Apocalypse had taken over all of New York, with statues built to his likeness and all. Cable and Archangel were among the Horsemen encountered by Deadpool, but this universe's version of Peter Parker was the Horseman Pestilence. He had 4 arms and 4 legs, really helping with the whole spider aesthetic thing. That, plus he developed an odd craving for human bones. Had a portal opened up in this universe sending this version of Peter to the MCU, the world would certainly be in for a shock. One of Spider-Man's longest and greatest enemies is Dr. Otto Octavius, also known as Doc Ock. The once mentor to Peter, whose mind was lost to 4 mechanical arms that became surgically attached to him, led to Otto becoming one of the greatest villainous masterminds ever to hit a comic book page. During one comic storyline, the villain seemed to be fading from life. In order to continue on, he figured out how to switch his mind with the Amazing Spider-Man. Therefore, Peter would be trapped in the rapidly aging body of Doc Ock, while one of Marvel's greatest villains became trapped in the body of one of its greatest heroes. The result was called the Superior Spider-Man. While you would think that Doc Ock would use Spider-Man for villainy, the memories of Peter actually drove Otto to become a hero. However, he went about it in a very different way. He used methods of torture, violence, and murder to defeat his villains. It pointed out to a lot of people a significant character change in the hero. So if Tom Holland starts torturing people, it's safe to assume that that might be the Superior Spider-Man. He likes egg creams and burning matches down to his fingertips. And while he may not be a villain, he definitely is a dark version of the character. I mean, it's in the name. Spider-Man Noir definitely fights on the side of good, but he's still a much darker version of the character. This version of Peter Parker comes from the Noir Marvel Universe, where things are slightly more serious. Peter not only witnessed the loss of his Uncle Ben like the normal Spider-Man, but it was done in a much more brutal and violent way. This hardened this version of Peter, who never learned about great power and something about responsibility or whatever. Instead, he believes that he has a responsibility to take great power away from others. He's slightly more violent and on the whole has a more depressing story, but still fights crime like the best of them. I'd love to see Nick Cage transported to the MCU for some good old-fashioned Spider-Man banter with Tom Holland. I know what you're thinking, and no, I'm not talking about the terrible third installment in the X-Men franchise. The Last Stand Peter Parker is the one who made an alternate choice to a classic hero debate. Should heroes end the lives of their villains? Or does the reluctance to murder make them more heroic? The classic Peter is very reluctant to use his powers for murder, but the Last Stand version decided long ago that the world would be a better place without his villains in the picture. He became a masked vigilante, with a really cool jacket, and more in common with Frank Castle's The Punisher as opposed to the main Spider-Man. In this alternate future, Peter not only lost his parents and Uncle Ben, but Aunt May as well, driving him to put much less value on human life, making it significantly easier to take it. While this version of Spider-Man isn't evil, he certainly provides a moral conundrum for our wide-eyed webbed hero. If the two were to find themselves in the same universe, they may end up fighting when the Last Stand Spider-Man tries to end the lives of Peter's villains. Have you ever seen The Fly? Well, this one is a lot like that, just with a significantly less amount of Jeff Goldblum. In one storyline, Spider-Man and Angel were sent back to a prehistoric time, populated with mutated creatures and beasts. The two heroes find themselves trapped in a machine that transforms their molecular structure as well. It was during this time that Peter Parker was transformed into a mindless beast, whose genetic makeup was half spider and half man. He of course went by the name Man-Spider. Creative. He was a man-sized six-armed feral creature who attacked most things in his multiple-eyed sight. Probably the coolest part is that he still wore the uniform for some reason. The violent version of Spider-Man would be an interesting addition to the MCU. While the multiverse seems to be pulling villains from relatively similar time periods, a prehistoric mutant would be a cool addition. Maybe he could be tamed and Venom could even keep him as a pet. With an infinite amount of alternate universes, there's bound to be at least one where Peter Parker is a complete sociopath. In many alternate universes, several well-known heroes, as well as other morally ambiguous characters, were actually ultra-violent villains. These include Deadpool, Sabretooth, a female Hulk, Storm, the Vision, and a villainous version of Spider-Man known simply as the Spider. These 6 villains were brought from their universes together to form a super team called Weapon X. In his universe, the Spider was basically just Cletus Cassidy. He was a convicted serial murderer sentenced to 67 life sentences. He even at one point gets possessed by the Carnage symbiote as well. Overall, the Spider was recruited to be a hero, but at his heart is a villain. This psychopath could be brought from another universe thought to be a hero, revealing his criminal rap sheet and slightly murderous tendencies. The villainous doppelganger is perhaps one of the most vicious-looking versions of Spider-Man ever seen. During the Infinity War, Magus, also known as Adam Warlock when he wakes up on the wrong side of the bed, made several clones of one of Earth's mightiest heroes, Peter Parker. Doppelganger is considered to be a completely mindless, ferocious animal. He resembles Peter Parker in every way, except the gnashing teeth and extra 4 arms. Actually, he also had sharpened talons, razor-sharp webbing, and was about as smart as your average house pet. So this is one clone that definitely didn't inherit a whole lot of characteristics from its host. Doppelganger was defeated during the Infinity War, and was later resurrected by the Demogoblin. During Maximum Carnage, he joined several villains in a spree of absolute violence. The wife of Carnage, Shriek, formed a close bond with the creature, and became sort of an adopted mother to him. Doppelganger could find himself brought in to face Venom in the main MCU timeline. And while he may not know much, he certainly won't be happy once he finds out what happened to his mother figure in Eddie Brock's universe. It seems no matter how bleak the universe is, you can almost always find an upbeat, superpowered, spider-themed teenager running around. We've explored multiple multiverse realities where Peter Parker becomes some sort of villain. But one of them is a reality where just about every character can be classified as a mindless monster. The Marvel What If series shows us what happens when a quantum virus is unleashed on the universe, causing nothing short of a zombie apocalypse. In this universe, there were very few uninfected remaining, who were desperately searching for a cure. Among those still living were T'Challa, the head of Scott Lang, and of course our favorite wall crawler. While they flew off with optimism, we the audience learned of the actual fate of the universe, that they were flying right into a zombie Thanos trap, likely leading to the 3 of them becoming zombified as well. Any of the characters from this specific universe being transferred to the main MCU timeline would cause incredible destruction, especially since that universe is currently without a Mind Stone to warn off the evil zombies. A zombified Spider-Man could be pulled in along with Venom to cause utter bedlam in the MCU. not only being a mindless monster, but one who tries to eat everyone in sight. Hey, maybe him and Venom would actually have something to bond over now.